Hey, good day, folks. Welcome, everybody, to our seventh lesson, seventh installment, and Beyond the Seven, live from Jerusalem with Rabbi Aaron David Poston, who I am getting to know more, and I so am grateful that he takes this time to teach us great lessons. These lessons are taking us a little bit further than most have been sharing with B'nai Noach. It's a joy to hear it come out of Israel and out of Jerusalem, especially from a learned rabbi such as him. So without delay, I'm just going to jump right in and see how Rabbi's doing today. Rabbi Poston, so good of you to stay up. I know it's like 11:30 p.m. there in Jerusalem, and you just hang in there and stay up so that you can share with the rest of the world. We thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for all the people who joined us tonight. I want to thank you for joining us. What can I say? Shavua Tov. Have a great week from Jerusalem. For all those, again, who are far east of us, you've already made Havdalah a long time ago. For those in Europe, you just made Havdalah like we did. And for all those in America, welcome aboard. And for all those who are watching afterwards, we thank you also.
They appreciate it.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think, take up where we left off last week. There was, I mentioned it may be controversial. Apparently, there are some people who have found what I'll mention the rabbi's name, who's been accused of being a little bit off base, Rabbi Manis Friedman, and I think it's a big mistake that these people are accusing him of teaching. Put it this way, when you take a clip, just a small clip, and you try to make something look very bad, it's a big problem. And let me just explain. We're going to be reading tonight a little bit a lot from the Mesilat Yesharim, where we left off. The very last statement was doing something for God. And I mentioned, you can't do anything for God. This is a core principle in Judaism. So I'm going to try to explain it. I'm going to try my best to explain it in simple terms. I know this can be very Kabbalistic. There's a book called the Tanya. I don't know if you can see it. Okay. This is the Bible of Chabad. It's basically all the Hasidim appreciate this deep Kabbalistic work explaining the way of God. Now seems to be, I'm going to use this, it's called the Nefesh Chaim. It was put out around the same time, a little bit later, after the Tanya, but the same generation, by Rav Chaim Volozhin, who is the star student of the Vilna Gaon. That I'm going to read something from. It's called the Svarim blog. I'm going to read a few paragraphs from it because he really explains that there's no difference. There's no difference. What the Hasidim did, and I mentioned before, I have nothing against Hasidim. And neither does the Ramchal. But there's a difference between people who are learned and have excelled, let's say go beyond, had gone beyond the letter of the law, which is what the Ramchal explains is the midah, the character trait of Hasidut. And so there's no difference. Let's say the difference is between, let's say, the leaders who are well learned and some of the followers who some of them may not be as learned and are following just out of rote. And that could be a problem. We all agree in any situation. Okay, so where did I want to? So let me just show you this new volumes, these new translations. It's called the Nefesh Hatzimtzum. It's a 2-volume series. Okay, and this is where the Svarim blog is based on this new book that came out. I don't know how new. I shouldn't say it's that new, but I could tell you when it was put out. 2015.
Recent.
But we're talking about it was written 250 years ago. Let me start. Let me just start a little bit going back why we're doing this. But this is called Beyond the Seven. So Beyond, to me, introduces the idea of being a Hasid, a true Hasid. Why? Because as the Rambam begins to explain that all of mankind is, let's say, mazhir, they're warned, they're supposed to be careful. And that is where the Mesilat Yesharim actually begins, the path of the just begins, where you're careful, and then he brings these steps. Again, just to reiterate, this is based on a brisa of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair on how to eventually reach Ruach HaKodesh, resurrection of the dead. Okay, if you have to go back to the first six, maybe the introductory of this Beyond the Seven. But since the Rambam starts off with Zahir, you have to be careful. You were warned in the seven. Eventually, what he does say is that someone who's accepted these laws because of the revelation at Mount Sinai, he's now called a Hasid. So I believe, this is just, where I'm going with this, is that the word Hasid was not used lightly. It's someone who feels that they are, again, there's no such thing as a new religion. Somebody asked, is this like some kind of new religion, new fad? This goes way back. We could talk about Jethro, perhaps before he converted. Even if he converted, he was a righteous Noahide. Of course, we have people before that. Even Ruth, before she converted, she was known to be a righteous person, and her name, Ruth, the value, the gematria is 606, because she accepted beyond the seven another 606 mitzvahs when she converted, but she was a righteous Gentile, keeping the seven before she converted. So Ruth is 606 plus 7 is 613, and she's known to be a righteous Gentile as well before she converted. So the idea of Hasidut can be really misunderstood, and that is where the Ramchal in the Mesilas Yesharim is basically, as I left off last week, he says, maybe we'll also talk about it now, that I don't really want to go back too far, but he mentions that many pseudo-Hasidim, that's the term he uses, have sullied the image of Hasidut in the eyes of the masses, even intelligent people, because they think that the whole concept of Hasidut is based on empty ideas. And trust me, they're not. It's the deepest of deep, and according to what we'll understand in the Nefesh HaChaim, the difference between the Tanya, he basically, according to this Sfarim blog, he himself did not go into many sources, okay? Whereas the Nefesh HaChaim actually did. And the sources are, and we're going to see tonight, already back from the Gemara and in the Torah itself. Okay, with that said, I hope we have some clarity here on why we're doing this. So this chapter 18 in the Mesilas Yesharim begins, we're not in the beginning, but we're a little bit further in, where he mentions about these pseudo-Hasidim do not realize that although some of the things are necessary for penitence to achieve full atonement, and some are appropriate measures for Perushim. Now, what's the difference? Perushim are those, we call them the Pharisees, right? They're the ones that separate themselves. They're more concerned about not violating the negative commandments. And that, I hope, by any righteous Gentile watching this, is already fully aware of what they are and is careful not to violate them, but also to fulfill certain positive commandments. That would be more like a Hasid, or we're going to discuss this. Let's keep reading. So we mentioned that the Perushim, they are the measures they take are in order to distance themselves from sin. Okay, and there's a comment here that explains that sometimes it's appropriate to deprive oneself somewhat in order to uproot haughtiness. So haughtiness is something to stay away from. One of the ideas that we brought over many, many times is it's not 7 specific laws. There are 7 categories and many laws underneath them. And we spoke in the very beginning about 30 laws. One of them I want to mention now, just so we have clarity. They're not all negative commandments. One of them in that list of 30 was the positive commandment to engage in the study of those parts of the Torah that are relevant to the Noahides. How can a Noahide ever expect to fulfill at least minimally the 7 as best they can before going on and trying to do other mitzvahs, right? Character development is part of this. Being a truly moral person at least when we talked about the 7, we're also saying anything that is logical, right, is incumbent upon a Noahide to fulfill as well. So dinim, that means setting up a system of courts and justices, they have to make up their own laws, and they have to be logical and good for society. And so basically, when we talk about character development, something to stay away from would be a haughtiness and any other, let's say, disgusting behaviors. And we're seeing a lot of that, unfortunately, in America right now. I don't want to get into it because it really has absolutely nothing to do with race, what I'm about to talk about. Perhaps the riots or the protests are. But I actually spoke about this to a friend today. What does it mean to be a victim, right? Let's say somebody feels the victimhood. It doesn't mean that that's bad. The question is, what do you do about it, right? So I thought the Jews are a good example. We have used the victim card, but what has it done for us? What do we do with it, right? So we say never again, okay? We want to educate other peoples not to be anti-Semitic, right? We do everything we can to metakein, to fix the world around us. We take this idea of the fact that we were victims, and we don't play the victim card and say, you owe us, right? We are active participants in trying to make the world a better place. So what could somebody use as a victim card? Reparations, right? Even when Germany said, we want to give you reparations, we said, whoa, don't, not so fast. Not so. It took a lot of deliberation and government's discussion of how to accept such a thing. So it's not as simple just to go out and say we are the victims and we will always be the victims. And it doesn't achieve anything. In fact, what I see certain groups doing is they lower the bar so much that they never expect to get out of this victimhood. Okay, they want to remain there and milk it for all it's got. As opposed to what I see so many, and I'll just make sound political, many conservative of Afro-Americans who are really striving, whether it's I don't know all the names, I'm sorry, but somebody's in charge of the housing of the United States government. He was a brain doctor, right? I think it was Carlson or something like that. Anyway, he made something of himself. Candace Owens speaks about it in much better terms than I ever could. So I just hope that people could open their minds, right, to hear two sides. And that's what we're going to discuss as well today, hearing two sides between what we call the Hasidim and the Misnagdim. I gave a very short synopsis in the last class, how there was a lot of tension. It started with the Shabbatai Tzvi cult movement, and then the fear amongst everyone else. But at the same time, there was a lot of ignorant people and people who weren't learned. And there was a disparity in the classes. There was no question about it. And I believe that Hasidim saved, they really did. I hope that everyone who's watching understands where I'm coming from. They saved Jewry. And the Nefesh HaChaim seems like he came as a response, not that he was against Hasidim, he was against certain aspects of Hasidim, which we're going to talk about tonight, which is, I'll call it, like an ignoramus cannot be a Hasid. Okay, that's what it says in Pirkei Avot. Someone who, and so for the people who are keeping the laws of Noahide, they should also understand, I'm not promoting, even though the Rambam says it's okay if you're already righteous to take on additional mitzvahs. I'm not promoting to take on additional mitzvahs. I'm promoting to really get the 7 concepts down well and go as deep and as deep as possible, make them meaningful before you would even think of, let's say, keeping kosher, right? Like, how about the way I speak, right? What comes out of your mouth could be, for Noahide, much more important than what you put into your mouth, right? However, according to the deepest Kabbalistic concepts within Judaism, that the animals that are kosher happen to be non-aggressive. They're not carnivorous. They're not the ones that go around and eat the junk off the bottom of the ocean. nor are they like vultures that go around and eat,
Exactly.
dead corpses. These are more like domesticated, tame, calm, and you really are what you eat. Okay, so there are lessons to be learned. So if someone wants to work on their character, it may help them to decide to eat kosher animals, but really the work is not simply just eating kosher animals and therefore taming your animal self, but to work on your character in a real systematic way. So,
Beautiful.
as I mentioned, that underneath the 7 laws are these moral objectives. Okay, so going back into where we left off, sorry. So basically the idea of Perushas is to distance yourself from sin. Nevertheless, Hasidus is not founded upon these practices at all. Rather, the best of these practices is worthy of complementing the practice of Hasidut. Now, let me just read that comment. Hasidus should, for example, be accompanied by the recitation of supplications, as the Ramchal discusses in the next chapter. But a Hasid ought to feel the pain of the Jewish people, let's just say for a non-Jew, for all mankind, and pray on their behalf or pray for their behalf. So this is now talking about like positive actions. However, the essence of Hasidut itself is a very profound matter, requiring intensive study in order to correctly understand it. So you really have to study it, and you have to study the whole Torah, or at least the Torah that is relevant to you. It is founded upon principles of immense wisdom and upon the absolute refinement of one's conduct. The whole idea of Mesilas Yesharim is about working on your character. And as such, it is fitting for everyone who is wise of heart to pursue it. So going back to something we mentioned in previous classes, that the Rambam seemed to classify 2 types of Bnei Noach. One who is just very, I'm going to use the word wise, I don't know another term to use, but very intuitive. He understands God from a purely, investigative manner. He understands there has to be a creator, but he hasn't fully yet bought into the idea of the revelation. So he realizes that these 7 laws are good. So he's considered wise amongst the nations. He may be an atheist. I doubt it. Maybe he's agnostic at least. And maybe he believes in the Almighty. But he hasn't yet bought the whole picture that there is a revelation, there's a Torah. And once someone accepts that I would call, the Rambam calls, a Hasid. And therefore he would also, or she would also get not just blessing in this world like the wise amongst the nations, but someone who goes beyond that and actually receives the world to come, which is an unbelievable kindness for infinity. Okay, so we already just mentioned someone who has this wise heart to pursue it, for in fact only the wise can truly attain it. So we mentioned Rav Kook. There was an interesting idea. One of your listeners passed this on to me, and I spoke to someone who works in the Rav Kook Institute. He's actually the great-grandnephew of Rav Kook. And Rav Kook seemed to imply from the Rambam that the wise was a Kal V'chomer, that of course he gets the world to come. So it sounded like at first reading, perhaps it's a totally different reading than we've all read, that it's the Hasid who actually is a much higher level, and the wise is on a much lower level. But what he seems to say is that it's only through thinking. This is what God gave you. Think. Nobody's trying to brainwash you. Nobody's trying to just slip it under the rug and just say believe like some other religions. We need you to think what's logical. And so really, according to Rabbi Dovid Kidron, it's both. What Rav Kook was saying was, you have to believe in God and you have to believe in the revelation, but don't stop thinking. Use your mind. And that was what Rav Kook was speaking about. Okay, I could be wrong, and Rav Kidron could be wrong, but that is where we're at today. Okay, so this is the last statement on that paragraph. As the sages of blessed memory say in Pirkei Avot, that's Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 2, Mishnah 5, Lo am haaretz Hasid. that an ignorant person cannot be a Hasid. It cannot be a practitioner of Hasidut. So let me read this comment. This does not mean that only one who has been blessed with exceptional wisdom can hope to serve Hashem with Hasidut. Actually, anyone is capable of attaining this level of service. Keep in mind, we're talking about serving Hashem. As long as he sincerely seeks wisdom and looks to be guided in the way of Hasidut by those wiser than he. And that is also why there's really no problem with a non-Jew learning Torah from the Jews. I don't want to get into it now. I spoke about it before. But if he goes on his own and tries to figure it out, he's likely, I don't know if it's 100%, but he's likely to misinterpret it, not understand, not to come to a complete. So one of the questions that was asked, you mentioned through a text, someone asked, aren't there special leaders of the Noahide movement? And there are. There are very learned non-Jews. I mentioned a few of them besides you, Ray Peterson, you humble guy you were, and the Nativ Center, Rod Bryant, Reuven Bryant. Besides that, pretty much, I'm going to say any rabbi who's teaching Torah, right? There may be a few that don't have the sensitivity to speak directly to Gentiles, but pretty much, I'm just saying, it's not absolute. Pretty much any Torah scholar who's going to teach about what the Torah has to say is a legitimate teacher. But there are going to be those who are much more sensitive and will focus much more on, let's say, like we're doing here, and other people you have on your broadcasting that are more, I'm not going to say likable, right? Maybe we're more likable, but we're more accessible, and we are focusing a little bit more to a non-Jewish audience. Did I finish that paragraph? No. So when the Mishnah excludes an unlearned person from being a Hasid, it refers to one who has not sought wisdom and thinks he can attain Hasidut without it. Okay, so that is a very important point. I wonder if the Ramchal points this out now. There is another note. Okay, I'm not sure where he points it out, but let's go on. So what then is authentic Hasidut? And he mentioned, I mentioned in the last class, I'm going to talk about a Gemara in Brachot 17a, which I'm going to do now, right after I read this paragraph. Now we shall explain this matter in an orderly fashion. The root of Hasidut is encapsulated by what our sages of blessed memory said. And this is what I would find controversial. Those rabbis that are on Rabbi Manis's case, Rabbi Friedman's case, is this statement in Chazal in Brachot. Fortunate is he who toils in the Torah and who brings satisfaction to his Creator. What kind of satisfaction? This is a statement that needs deep analysis. So before I do that, I just want to mention when I brought those other books, the Nefesh HaChaim and the Tanya, why it's really not a problem is where I'm here. There's absolute truth that comes from Hashem's perspective. But we're in this world, and then there's our perspective. Now, our perspective can very much be wrong, but it's not always wrong. It's a little bits and pieces of that absolute truth. So this is where controversy enters. Because the concept of tzimtzum is, how do we view this infinite thing, entity? We are finite. How can a finite being ever comprehend or begin to understand that which is infinite? So we have Masorah, we have tradition that tries to explain it. We can never really give satisfaction to Hashem, but that is seemingly what we're supposed to do. I'll just reiterate where we left off last week. A son relates to his father. His father is cold. He's in a room, and yes, it's probably a little bit too cold. So the father implies that it's cold. So what does the son do? The son has a choice. He could just give the father the remote control and say, okay, Dad, turn up the heat. You're cold, turn up the heat. The son could turn up the heat for him. Or he can go beyond and say, I understand what my father needs. He's cold. So not only am I going to turn up the heat, but then I'm going to get him a blanket, and then I'm going to serve him tea, right, with a smile. Now that's called Hasidut, because it's called going beyond the letter of the law. You already know what God wants. Or let's say the father. Well, you already know what the father wants, and he doesn't even have to say it a second time. He doesn't have to explicitly say more words for what he wants, right? Yeah, of course he would like the blanket. Of course he would like a hot cup of tea. But all he asked you was, well, it's a little cold in here. You on your own decided a few things, right? So you want to give him the shalat, the control, or you want to turn up the heat. You want to satisfy him. So that is where we're at. To discuss this point is in the Gemara. It's in Gemara Brachos 17a. I see we're not going to get to the Svarim blog yet. Okay, so my Rosh Hashiva always said, there's nothing you can do for Hashem. But yet the Ramchal, and he was big on the Ramchal, would need to explain this. So when I read the Gemara and I said, wow, I think this is really something that would interest you guys, because it's about Job. Job, by the way, if he existed, he was a non-Jew. Who wrote the book of Job? Moses wrote the book of Job. So if you didn't come out learning anything here, at least you learned one thing. Who wrote the book of Job? And according to some, it was not even a real figure. He never existed, but it was a philosophical work that Moses wrote as a result of his own question that he asked God, show me your glory. When Moses says, show me your glory, what he was really asking, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad people prosper? Why do good people suffer? You wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, Rabbi, because I have heard a rabbi share before that, when you start reading the book of Job and the description of the lands and all the details that are in there, that he was partners with his friends that were part of a conglomerate that was of a distant relationship to the family of Abraham. I think even it says there was a man who lived in, was it the land of Uz, and all these connections have, one rabbi I've heard really brought it out that it was an agreed group that agreed to look after themselves as Bedouins once did, tribal people, and they would come to each other's aid, and they had an understandable, honorable group that was between the time of Abraham and actually Moses, but the story was renowned, and Moses brought it together, I heard, to share with the people while they were still in Egypt. Is that true?
It's all possible. Like I said, there are different opinions, whether if he really existed, he existed from the time of Abraham through till Moses, because the Medrash says that he was one of the three advisors to Pharaoh. Okay, Pharaoh didn't know what to do about the Jewish solution, right? They call, like in Germany, Nazi Germany, Yimach Shimon, that they had a final solution for the Jewish problem. So Bilam is the one who says, throw the baby males into the river, right, the Nile River, and kill them. And as measure for measure, of course, he was killed in the end. Job, let's talk about Jethro. Jethro was also one of the advisors, and in protest, he ran away. He felt this was unfair, and to protest openly, what do you say? You're signing your death sentence. So he protested in a way that was certainly valid. He said, no, I'm not for this, and he ran away. And so that Jethro ends up what? Marrying his daughter off to Moshe, okay, and becoming a righteous convert. But his biggest, I'm not saying his biggest reward, but his own children, his own great-great-grandchildren sat on the Sanhedrin. So you're talking measure for measure. He was for justice. He was into justice, and as a result, his own children sat on the Sanhedrin. What did Job do? Apparently, the Medrash says that he would remain silent. He didn't protest. He didn't agree. But as they say sometimes, that being silent is like agreement. And as a result, his punishment was that he was caused to scream out because of his silence, which was wrong. So the punishment was the Yisurim, was the extreme pains, seeming punishment. They weren't punishment. We'll see, hopefully, shortly. There was issues that had to be worked out over there with Job. So that's what we're going to go with tonight. So let me just go to the Gemara. It mentions about this particular Gemara discusses the different Talmudic sages, what they would say when they finish their Amidah, when they finish their silent Shmoneh Esrei and prayer. And after that, it brings a side statement of what Rabbi Yochanan would say whenever he finished the book of Job. So, by the way, when we finish a whole Masechta of the Talmud, which are 36 of them, or finish an entire book of the Torah, of the Tanakh, and in the way that Rabbi Yochanan did, in other words, he studied every letter and every word and went deep, he would make a big party. Okay, it's a big deal. So he would mention these words. I'll just say it in English, although the Hebrew is very, you know what, I'll say both. Okay. Let me read it in English first. A person will ultimately die, and an animal will ultimately be slaughtered, and all are destined to death. Now this sounds very gruesome and depressing. We'll see that it's not. But rather, happy is he who grew up in Torah, whose labor is in Torah, and these are the words, and who gives pleasure to his Creator. How can you give pleasure to your Creator? Who grew up with a good name and took leave of this world with a good name. And such a person lived his life fully. About him, Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 7:1, a good name is better than fine oil, and the day of death is better than the day of one's birth. So basically, this Gemara is talking about good deeds, your fulfillment of mitzvahs or kind acts, which I mentioned from the very beginning. This is what Yiboneh is all about. So accompanying all of our chesed projects, we want people to learn about chesed. And that's another reason why I chose Beyond the Seven, because we're going to find out the root of Hasidut is really about chesed, which I hope nobody stones me for this. It's about doing chesed for Hashem. Hashem doesn't need anything from you. Yet this is all about somehow satisfying him, doing it for you, not for yourself. Doing it for him. What does he need? Okay, I'm going to get myself in trouble, but nobody can stone me. This is the Gemara, okay?
Rabbi, that's angelic. If you know, it's really, truly angelic. I mean, when you think about doing hesed, deeds of kindness, acts of loving kindness, I mean, you're being an extension, you know, and I saw that when I researched your background before we ever, this guy's doing just kind work. That's all he's about.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I hope that other people will just follow my lead. Before I go into this, I just want to mention there's a well-known statement about the tablets. Yeah, you have 5 commandments on each of the 2 tablets that were given to us, which we call the 10 commandments or the 10 statements. So it's well known that the first 5 have to do with the connections, the mitzvot, between man and God. And the second set is between man and man. Now you can look at them and see them, but you have to ask this question. Rabbi Poston, if that's true, what do you do with number 5? It's on the first set of tablets, right? If it was number 6, I got it. But it's number 5. Honor your father and your mother. What does that have to do with between me and God? Okay, let's see if anybody has any questions. But in the meantime, answers. But let's say like this. I know there are people that have very dysfunctional relationships with their parents. I get it. I understand. But there's, like Rabbi Kaufman mentions, there's no test that you didn't get that you can't handle. You can get beyond it, which kind of relates a little bit back to these riots, right? The beyond, obviously protesting is not only praiseworthy and legal, but it's the right, okay? We're not talking about protesting, okay? We're talking about horrible crimes being committed. So basically, how do you relate to Hashem? Hopefully you had a father in your house, right? I know this is a big problem in today's day and age. Some people don't have a father in the house. Or if they do, some have two mothers or two fathers. I mean, there's some real issues going on that I don't want to even go into. But let's just say a lot of people do have dysfunctional families. But the main idea is that hopefully we realize that our parents gave us life. We have to have an attitude of gratitude for whatever they gave us. Hopefully it was a warm environment with a roof over our heads, with delicious food, but it wasn't always, right? Some people do not have that comfort. I got it. Okay. This is what I call the Trinity in Judaism, the Holy Trinity in Judaism. Man has three partners, not God. I want everyone to understand that. The name Adam, A-D, Aleph, Daled, Mem, okay, is the gematria of 45, okay? Right? Aleph is 1, Daled is 4, Mem is 40. So you have 45. How is there three parts in man? First of all, the man gives, when he inseminates the semen, he's giving over the white part, and that goes to our teeth and our bones. And the female is the red part, and that goes to the flesh and the skin. And the God, Hashem, gives the spirit. Okay? That's why we have this Trinity. Now look at the name man. Adam is 45. The word mother and father actually equals 44. So you have Av, which is 1, Aleph, and Bet, which is 2, which is 3 altogether. And then you have Aim, which is Aleph, Mem, which is 41. So 41 and 3 is 44. And then you have the Aleph left over. The Aleph is 1. It's always referring to Hashem. So you have Adam, right? You have the full 45. But the idea that Hashem, even the Aleph, is a letter that's made up of 3 other letters. You have a Vav on its side, and then you have these 2 Yuds protruding out from the top and the bottom. So Yud is 10, 2 Yuds, that's 20, and the Vav is 6. God's Yud, Hey, and Vav and Hey is the gematria of 26. So within all this framework, man, so we have an attitude of gratitude towards our human parents, right? The physical life they gave us, an opportunity. So we're grateful to them. We have to show gratitude, and that's part of the idea of Kibbutz Aim. But Hashem, without the Spirit, He gave us the Spirit, and for that we're also grateful for. So why is the 5th mitzvah of honoring your father and mother in the category between you and God? Because God gave us these human parents so we can understand what it means to have parents, to have gratitude. Every time they changed our diapers, every time they gave us our lunchbox on the way to school, every time they made sure that we finished our homework, which was good for us, right? That we didn't eat too much candy. Whatever it was, they tucked us in a bed at night, right? They sacrificed. A parent sacrifices a tremendous amount for his children, for their children. So, with a mother, I can just imagine 9 months carrying. It must be very uncomfortable. Forget about painful at the end, right? So there's a lot of sacrifice that the parents do for their children. But that's what we call the Holy Trinity in Judaism. That's 3 partners in man, not in God. I guess somebody along the line got a mistake somewhere. But, okay, we're not going to go there. Okay, why are we talking about that? I said we always go off on these tangents. Okay, so the Hebrews, like Rabbi Yochanan, Kihave Messiah Sapra Deiu, whenever Rabbi Yochanan would finish this book called Job, Amar Hachi, this is what he said: Sof Adam Lamus, the end of man is to die, which sounds very morbid. Cool. Sof Behema Lashchita, the end of an animal is to be slaughtered. Hakola Misahem Omdim. Hear the words, because we're going to discuss these words. Everybody, both man and animal, it's for death they are standing. Omdim. Ashrei mi shegodo b'Torah. Remember, I mentioned that Job was a non-Jew. Everyone agrees with that, if he existed, right? He was a non-Jew. And when So this applies, I think, to everybody. And this is, I think, why I'm discussing with you, not just because of these words specifically that we said that you're going to give satisfaction to your Creator, which we're going to get to very shortly, but because he was also a non-Jew. And a non-Jew, as I mentioned, has an obligation to engage in the study of those parts of the Talmud, of the Torah that relates to the Noahide laws. So, Ashrei mi, happy or fortunate, is mi shegada b'Torah, who's growing, who grew in Torah, and the amalo b'Torah, and toiling in Torah. The oisei nachas ruach liyotzro, and he makes or creates something satisfactory. It's interesting, nachas ruach, to his Creator. Now, I'm just mentioning this is all coming down to ma'asim tovim. It's all coming down to what we call positive actions. Everyone agrees that's what it's talking about. The gadol b'shem tov, and if you grow, growing is it goes in stages. If you're growing with a positive name, meaning, what does it mean to have a good name? That people appreciate you, people like you. Nobody's afraid to walk across the street when you're coming down the street, greet you with open arms, so to speak. I know today's coronavirus day, nobody's hugging anybody, but when people are affectionate and warm, right? The nifter b'shem tov min olam. And when, God forbid, or obviously it's part of life, when someone passes on, they still have with them the shem tov, right? It's only at the end you really know if someone is true, right? Because they were nice in or good in their youth, doesn't mean they're going to finalize their term here on earth with a good name. But someone who keeps it all along, that's a good thing. And regarding that, that's what King Solomon said in Koheles, Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 1. Tov shein mishemen tov. A good name is better than good oil. V'yom hamavis miyom hivlado. And the day of his death is greater or better than the day of his birth. Okay, so again, what we're really concerned about is the actual source, right? What does it mean to give pleasure to your Creator? Now, this is based on a verse in Numbers, chapter 15, verse 7. So this is regarding offerings, but it's not only here. There's many places it talks about this idea that you shall bring a satisfying aroma to Hashem. What? He needs our offerings? He needs our sacrifices? Of course not. So this is where the oral Torah is so pertinent. You have to understand what is going on here. Now, this is where I wanted to bring in this quote from the Sfarim blog of the Nefesh Chaim. So everyone understands that, yes, there may be, and there was, almost like a civil war to a certain extent in philosophy between the early Hasid. When I say early Hasidim, I shouldn't say that. Whoa. Okay.
It's all good, Rabbi. These things happen.
Yeah. Especially when you're talking about the controversial things. Okay. And there was some infighting. Okay. There was some harsh words said then. And hopefully by now, those words are unnecessary. And this is where I want to bring to the point that a lot of people have grown through this dark period of Jewish history. And I really want to read these words because I think it's really 3 paragraphs. Okay. So bear with me. Read it all. Yeah. This is the very end of this Sfarim blog on this Nefesh Chaim, which I mentioned came out as from a student of the Vilna Gaon, from Chaim of Volozhin, and it seemed like it was going up against the Baal Tanya, the other book I have. This is the Bible of Chabad, of Hasidut. Okay, it seems, but wait till you hear this. This is just the end. After fully absorbing the fact that the philosophical outlook in relation to the Tzimtzum concept, Tzimtzum is a very Kabbalistic term that what did Hashem do, who's all infinite, to be able to create this finite world, which is our dilemma. How do we understand Hashem? The concept of the Vilna Gaon, the Reb Chaim, the Baal Tanya, and the Hasidic world are identical, absolutely identical. The genius of Reb Chaim's presentation in Nefesh Chaim can then be clearly seen. The Hasidic works of his day, including the Sefer Balatanya, the Sefer Tanya, barely quoted their sources. In contrast, where Reb Chaim presents his ideas in general, the concept of Tzimtzum in particular, ideas which at the time were seen by many to be uniquely Hasidic ideas, right? As if I mentioned before, some people think it was like a new revelation. No, he frames them in the context of extensive quotations from and references to traditional Jewish sources. None of it's new, but Baruch Hashem, it was said in a way for the masses to be able to get. As mentioned above, he even uses many similar expressions and sentences to those appearing in the Hasidic works of his day. He is demonstrating that there's no scope for anyone to suggest that there's a fundamental difference between the formal outlook of the Hasidic movement and that of mainstream Judaism, and that the paths for serving God of both the Hasidim and the Misnagdim, that means the ones that were against the Hasidim in the beginning, are fundamentally the same and are derived from the same Torah and the same Masorah, the same transmission all the way back to Mount Sinai. Therefore, against the historic backdrop of some who erroneously thought that the new Hasidic movement had blazed a new trail in Judaism and were using the inspiring Hasidic presentation of these concepts to compromise halacha. Now, this was one of the main concerns. And perhaps when it came to the more learned, it was really not necessarily a concern. But for the masses who were already ignorant to begin with and attached themselves to raise themselves up, it could lead to compromise in halacha. So Rav Chaim's key message is there's no basis for anyone to blend these concepts out of their true context of mainstream Judaism, and as a result, there's no basis for them to license halachic compromise in any way whatsoever. It's fascinating to note that Rav Chaim was not alone in this quest to highlight the potential pitfalls of halakhic compromise resulting from an attempt to get closer to God. He was joined by some of the establishment Hasidic figures who expressed themselves in a very similar way. Furthermore, it's inconceivable, it's not even possible to think that the leaders of the Hasidic movement, such as the Balatanya, which is the one who wrote the Tanya, would have sanctioned any form of halakhic compromise, because after all, he is the author of the famous, I'll call it the Shulchan Aruch Harav. It's widely respected and accepted halakhic work. It's not a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, but it's a condensed version of the great treatise of Rav Yosef Cairo called the Shulchan Aruch. It made halakha accessible to everybody, even the not so learned. So he was not, and the leaders were not interested at all in downgrading halacha. This is the last paragraph. The underlying principle guiding Reb Chaim's presentation in Nefesh HaChaim reflects the position of his master, the famous Vilna Gaon, that as the Kabbalah is an intrinsic part of the Torah, it cannot be that anything derived from it can prescribe any action which contradicts or is inconsistent with the Torah. Any directive derived from the Kabbalah which contravenes the Torah and halachic practice must therefore be a misunderstanding of Kabbalah. There's no way that Kabbalah can go against the halacha. We're talking about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, is responsible for Huar, and all these other Tanaic sources, authors, were the sources for all the other in Kabbalah. And in addition, this principle was explicitly highlighted by some of the Hasidic masters who were also clearly objecting to the same phenomenon of halakhic compromise on the periphery of the Hasidic world that Reb Chaim was objecting to. Okay, now, I just want to hang in there. The last paragraph is about 6 lines. The outcome of all the above is that because of Reb Chaim's historic motivation to write the Nefesh HaChaim, he has left us with a remarkable work, a motivational framework of how a person is to view and philosophically interact with the world, which substantiates every statement it makes by referencing many traditional Jewish sources in general and Kabbalistic sources in particular. As a result, this is just a plug for the book, but it's really about the book itself, not just this new edition.
The balance of it.
It itself is a unique gateway into the highly unstructured world of Kabbalah. It is a tremendous portal through which a genuine introduction to the world of Kabbalah and to the deeper meaning of the Torah has been made accessible to one and all. This last line, may the study of Nefesh HaChaim and Reb Chaim's Torah bring a true conscious awareness of unity in the Jewish world. And this is what I'm praying for, because the idea that Rav Manis Friedman is somehow off is like a ridiculous comment. Of course, if you just listen to 1 minute, you would take it out of context. Like here, if I tell you, listen, we're going to make God happy, we're going to do things to make God happy, it sounds ridiculous. So when I put it in context, that we're talking about from our view, not from the absolute truth, there's nothing you can do to change or improve God, but it's all about you and what you can do to improve yourself, because that's what your life is really all about. And with that introduction, I want to go into a few of the ideas in the commentary on this particular Gemara. Now, I hope that people understand that I use text a lot, and I don't know where to start. I want to talk about the Ben Yehuda. I see I'm already close to an hour. I really want to do the Ben Yehuda first. It's
Take
interesting.
as much time as you need, Rabbi.
Okay. It's so interesting that you mentioned about Job being perhaps at the time of Abraham, because the Ben Yehuda, I told you, is a great Kabbalistic sage from Iraq, a Jewish sage about 150 years ago. He's going to tell us about reincarnation, and that Job, in his previous lifetime, was Abraham's father, Terach, who worshipped idols. And in this world, when he lived in this world, he was purely righteous, but he had to pay for his past deeds. Okay, so let's begin to read a little bit. If that's interesting to anybody, let's hear. So the Ben Yehuda quotes the Gemara that says, whenever Rabbi Yochanan finished the book of Job, he would say these words. So this is how he always begins, near least the Siyata Deshmaya. With God's help, I will explain the reason for the words that Rabbi Yochanan uses after reading and learning Job. Because it's well known that Job was he was really a great tzaddik. He was really a great righteous person. But he received these Yisurim, very difficult ones, because of what they call Gilgul Rishon, because of a previous life. Shu Gilgul Terach, he was a reincarnation of Terach, who worshipped idols. Therefore, on account of his soul, that it's the same soul as Terach, this is why he received these tribulations, these trials and tribulations. Now I want to explain. No, I don't want to go there. Okay. Anyway, so he quotes the Ben Yehuda quotes the Al Shich on a verse, chapter in Job 32, verse 2, and mentioning like this. His wrath flared up against Job for judging himself more righteous than God. And his wrath flared up against his three friends because they had not found the proper response and had condemned Job. Remember, if you read, I suggest everyone read it with commentary, with Jewish commentary, that Job was experiencing death of family members, loss of such amount of wealth, and what else are his friends going to think? But you make a cheshbon nefesh, you have to take an accounting of your soul and figure out what you did wrong. I mean, this is really what Moses himself asked. from God. Why do good people suffer, right? And you don't always come and say, and the Ben Yehuda is going to say this, you don't always say, well, because you're a sinner. It's not always the case. And in fact, we know this was not the case with Job.
It's specified at the beginning.
And now in chapter 42, verses 16 and 17, after this, Job lived, this is the very end, the last two verses. Job lived 140 years. Now, if he was a sinner, he would have died much earlier. He would have also died completely, impoverished. But he not only gained everything back, he even had more family than he had earlier. Everything was replaced. It says he lived 140 years and he saw his children's children to the four generations. So he lived a long life. Then Job died, and old and satisfied. These are going to be the Hebrew words we're going to see. Old and satisfied. In Hebrew, it's zakein v'soveya yamin. Sovei is the same word we're using for satisfying Hashem. He's satisfied with years. Okay. So the Ben Yehuda continues, and he says that the truth is that yes, he had been totally righteous. He really was totally righteous in this world, and you can learn from this. Yilmod ha'adam bina, the man should use his noggin, his ability to understand that if he sees somebody with very difficult life, very difficult, seems like a punishment, you know what? If he's a tzaddik gamor, he's a completely righteous person, he shouldn't think that he's violating any of the character traits, right? But rather, he should actually place the reason for all this suffering is on a previous life. Now, I said I didn't want to speak about it, but I kind of want to fill in some ideas.
Amazing.
Where there's two verses that seem to contradict each other. One verse says that a person will not die on account of his father's sins. Another verse implies that a person will be held accountable for his father's sins. You know, I don't have the verses in front of me, but we'll take this up next
the
time.
Third and fourth generation, and the Ezekiel then talks about the sins being on the person themselves.
So these Kabbalists, the Ben Yehuda specifically, many other people explain that this is not talking about a father-son relationship. First of all, let's start like this. In the simple pshat, it is, right? That what's the difference? One is where you continue in the footsteps of your father, then you will be held accountable because Hashem is patient, right? Hashem doesn't take out his anger on the father because he's expecting that the person does tshuva. Then the next generation continues in the father's footsteps of acting, not justly. So then he will be held accountable and he'll face carrying the father's punishment as well, meaning he'll be punished more severely than if it was just him, because he had an opportunity. That's one idea. So the other one is that, what about the one who doesn't suffer? That's because he does not continue in his father's footsteps. So that would be the clear way to understand the contradiction. It's not a contradiction at all. But on a more Kabbalistic level, the way the Ben Yehuda and other Kabbalists explain, we're not talking about a father-son relationship. We're talking about my previous life, my soul is considered my father. The life I'm living now is considered the son. So again, the same idea. Am I following in the same footsteps as I did in my previous life? Right? If I am, then I will be punished. And if I don't, that means I have secured a path that will not be punished because I've gotten out of that bad track.
Beautiful. But that sets it up where Ezekiel says the soul that sins shall die. Boom.
Yeah. So this is what we're talking about here. So too with Job. So remember, it says what Rav Yochanan would say, the end of man. So what is he really saying at the end? He says everything, both man and animal, are destined for death. Didn't it already say that the end of man is death? And then it goes back and after it said that the animal is for slaughtering, and then it says everyone is destined for death. Means like this. This is what he means. That even those who are already dead, they're going to experience another death once they are omdin. Omdin means standing again. That they will come to a new incarnation in order to fix whatever took place in their past, and they'll die a second time. That's what it means by saying in the beginning, Sof Adam Lamut, the end of man is to die, and everybody, all are standing to die. Why did it need to be said twice? So then he says another reason. Because at the very end of Job, which we just read in chapter 42, verse 17, that he was a Zakein v'sovei yamin. He was an old man, but I want you to look also, this was spoken about, these same words pretty much are used by Abraham, where, I have it here somewhere. Yeah, it's in Genesis 25:8. I just can't find my source for it, but I'm pretty sure that's where it is. Yeah.
Would you like me to read it?
And just want to make sure it's really what I said it was. It is Genesis 25:8. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and Abraham expired and died in a good old age, an old man full of years, and was gathered to his people.
Okay, so basically the translation I had, and I'll read the Hebrew, and Abraham expired and died at a good age, a good old age, mature and content. So in Hebrew, it's B'seva Tova, Zakein v'Savea. The same words used by Job, Zakein v'Savea. Well, it's Savea Yamin, but okay. I'll find my place again. Here we are. Well, it doesn't say Yamin. Actually, no, I'm sorry. It says Yomim. Now, what does Yom mean? It means day. So the Ben Yoda says, shouldn't it have said Soveya Shanim? Why does it use the word day? Is everyone with us?
Well, yeah, you're still in 25:8.
He wants to say like this, and my students know this because even though they're not Jewish, many of my students are Jewish, but the ones who are the Bnei Noach, they say Moda'ani in the morning. They've accepted upon themselves to say, I'm grateful to Hashem for returning my soul every morning. Unbelievable. So what is it that we experience on a daily basis? We experience a part of death. When we go to sleep, there's a little bit of death. So he says, why does it say Sovei Yamim, a satisfactory of days? Well, we would just interpret that as life for years, but he doesn't use the word years. He uses the word days. We're talking about Moshe, who wrote this, or the Tanakh. Every single day, a person has a new life. We are born again every single day. Each day is a whole new life on its own. Because every single night when we go to sleep, a part of our soul leaves from us, from within us, and we are considered dead. And then we come back and we're given life every single morning. That's why we make another brach in the morning at the, right? Machzir neshamos l'vgerim mesim, that God returns the soul to dead corpses. Okay, we say that every morning because we actually feel that way. So every single day we're giving a new chance. So it's not just whatever I spoke about earlier about incarnations, but every single day we have a new incarnation. And we should really feel that way because not everyone wakes up in the morning. We should feel extremely grateful.
But that is truly living, though, Rabbi, what you're saying.
Truly living, yeah. And he says, that's why the real counting of the life of man, it's fitting to divide them into days, not years. That's why it says, Sovei Yamin. He was satisfied in his days. Okay, so there's really good stuff. I don't even know where to go. There's just too much. I want to, the truth is I can continue. I can continue a little bit now, and then we can continue this, start off next week with it.
It's your call, Rabbi.
I'll just continue because there's too much good stuff, and I know that there was never enough time to do it all, but it's just too delicious to skip over.
Delicious.
So I'm going to continue. Well, Tom is taste, and we're discussing the taste of the Torah. This is why he placed his words when he finished. We're talking about Rabbi Yochanan when he finished the book of Job, because we just said he was right in the book itself, in the Sefer of Job. It says he was Sovei Yamin. He was satisfied in his days. Sof Adam Lamus. That he says the end of man is to die. So, and then he says, if that's the case, then why would he say Hakol Misa Omdim, that everything is standing to die? You already said it. So he
You've worked yourself in a corner, I think.
Yeah, because there's just too much here. Sof Adam Lamus Misa Ikarit Shaholek Ba Lakaber. The truth is, the end of man, the main death, the prime death, is to go into the tomb. Besides the Misa Ikarit, the Kol Chaim Shalo Mesu Adayin. Aside from this prime death, all of his life, Shalo Matu Adayin, he didn't die, but rather when he was sleeping, Lemisa Shoshena Heimomdin. It's the Misa, it's the death of every single night you go to sleep. That is what you're destined for. Now he says, even the word Adam, if you take the letters Aleph, Daled, Mem, and you take the letter that's right after it, so right after Aleph is a Bet, after Daled is a Hey, and after the Mem is a Nun, so he says that's Bohen. Now, I'm not really sure where he's going with this because he says it relates to death, but Bohen is the big thumb on the, what do you call it? It's the thumb or the, on the toe. Now, the thumb is called Godel. I just want to explain something about when we say the Shema. Okay, when we say the Shema, we take our hand and we put it over our eyes. These four fingers, right? We're saying God is one. We're unifying God. These four fingers are going to have to actually represent the 70 nations. There's four prime kingdoms, right? That's we'll call it Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. They're all going in one direction. The Jew is the Godel, the great one, and they're going in an opposite direction than everyone else. Okay? So when we're unifying Hashem, we're just remembering that. But this is called the Godel. The Godel is the great one, and that represents the Jew going in a different direction. There's a verse that says that the Jewish people are a nation that dwells alone. So the Jewish people are alone. We're not really with the 70 nations, okay, in the direction they're going in. So the word Bohen is the big toe or the big thumb. And he says, I'm not really sure, I don't understand it completely, but he relates this to a medrash. Somehow the word Bohen relates to death. So he says that's actually hinted in the word man itself. As we just said, the second letter is called Osio Shniot. So the letter that comes right after it is this Bohen. Fine. So he says, how's it hinted in man? Because we just said, Ashrei mi shegoidel b'Torah. Happy is the one who's godel b'Torah, who's growing in Torah, great in Torah, as if to say, limudo b'Torah savev lo hagedula. It's the learning of the Torah, which is the cause for him to become great. So you've heard me already express how you could be Jewish. I think we discussed that, right? Jewish. So even my non-Jewish students say Modeh Ani. Now even the word Modeh Ani is saying I'm a Jew. I am admitting I am Modeh from the word Yehudah. It's the same root. Because you can be a non-Jew but affiliate so much with the Jewish cause or the Jewish mission or the Jewish nation and still not be part of the Israelite nation itself through conversion, but through taking the Torah, which we call the Torah of Israel, right? And the God of Israel upon yourself, you are basically Jew-ish. You've accepted the Malchus of Dovid, right? The Mashiach is coming through Yehuda. Okay, we discussed that already. And not only that, Vim kol zeh lo nitgaev lo nitrashelbo. One would not become haughty nor negligent in this, but rather these are the key words. Odenu oisen nachas ruach liyotro. But rather what you would do, and you would try to bring satisfaction to your Creator. Again, what does that mean? Nachas ruach. What is nachas ruach? It's interesting. Nachas is like some kind of satisfaction. Ruach is a spirit, some kind of satisfactory spirit. And he says, Ki oisek Torah metachem baruach, because involving yourself in Torah fixes your spirit, whatever that means, your soul, right? Even the soul itself, when God gave Adam, he breathed into him, he gave him this ruach. But guess what? The Targum Onkelos translates into Aramaic this breath of life that God gave into him. It's called the speaking spirit. What we do with Torah is something we speak. When you read it, you say it out loud, okay? And you put it into practice, of course. But anyway, anyone who involves themselves in Torah, and we already said, a non-Jew who's already a Ben Noach, it's a mitzvah to at least involve yourself in the 7, for sure. And if you go, I'll call it beyond, whatever that means, take on a vertical, meaning go deep into the 7. He can become like a Levi, as we said, and he's like the Kodesh Kadoshim, Mamish, Holy of Holies. Such a tzaddik, such a righteous person who's given himself over, like King David, to God's keeping. And God will take care of him. V'godo b'shem tov v'nifter b'shem tov. So if he constantly is growing in a good name, and he leaves this world eventually with a good name, so then there's this Gemara in Gemara Sukkah 53a. In the temple time, we had the elders, the really old ones, trust me, would dance and sing in front of everybody during Sukkot. They had such a festivity. The whole world would come and watch these old guys juggling and flamethrowers and juggling with fire and doing somersaults. And they would, while they were singing, this is what they would say: happy is our youth, as we did not sin then, that did not embarrass our old age. Those are considered the Hasidim. Those are the pious ones, who spent their entire lives in Torah and mitzvahs. But some would say, happy is our old age. Maybe these are not necessarily the people that were righteous their whole life. Happy is our old age that atones for, I can't read what I wrote here, for something when we had sinned. I think for our youth, these are penitents. So these are people who are like Bali Tshuva, people who were not always religious and then became religious.
Right.
But
so they had some remorse.
But both would say, happy is he who did not sin, and he who did sin should repent, and God will absolve him and forgive him. So whether you were in the past life or this life, all you have to do is worry about what you can do now. Everything is going to be fine. Some of my students ask me, how do I know what my past life was? Shouldn't I try to find out what it was so that I can work on that particular area? I said, first of all, it'll come to you, because anything that you passed, anything that you succeeded in conquering, God will not test you again. The things that you're faced with are those things that you have not yet passed. That's number one. Number two, if you're really hounding me and you really want to know, ask yourself this question. When you were young and you saw something your parents did that irked you, you just said to yourself, when I grow up, I'm not going to act like that. That's the last thing. It's so embarrassing, or it's so wrong. You just internally knew it was wrong. It's probably close to the target of what you probably need to work on. This is what I tell my students that ask me.
So true, Rabbi.
Okay, now, I think that most of these other commentaries, it's so key, I think that we should leave them for the next time, okay? I think it's very important because I don't want to go too fast, and I know we only have a few minutes, so let me see if I left anything. Let me just make sure in the Masilat Yesharim we left off in a good place as well. We didn't get very far.
Well, you brought it right home, though, and around to, the reality of going to sleep at night is death, and waking up and just living a new day every day, walking properly. And you brought things out that I think are useful, deep.
Well, when we go into this whole thing of Masim Tovim, the good acts, this is what life is all about. That's where we'll pick up next week, because this is really what Beyond the Seven is all about. When you hear about dinim, so many of your listeners have asked me, what about all those laws? I mean, being honest in business. This is the question that a Jew is supposed to be asked when he goes to heaven. I have no doubt that these are the kind of questions that are going to be asked of the non-Jew as well. The first question we're asked, were you honest in business? So what kind of business matters? Did you had some fine print in the contract that you hoped that the guy wouldn't read? I mean, is that being honest in business? I mean, that happens all the time, I'm sure. I mean, as a buyer, as a client, happens to me. So those people, they know they put it in the contract and they didn't point it out. So I don't think that's considered being honest in business. I know you can get away with it in court because, look, it's there, black and white. We told them to read it. We even gave them to take home. But, these things are not going to get you to heaven, and it's not going to give you a good life, and it's not going to give you a shem tov. The idea here that Job, right, and it's this idea, not Ecclesiastes, I should say, because Job died with a good name. That was the whole point. He died with a good name, but in Koheles, it was chapter 7, verse 1. Right? What do we say? A good name is better than fine oil, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. So, look, we're trying to live. I encourage anybody who didn't read the Kuzari to read the Kuzari. This was the king of the Kazrai nation who couldn't sleep. He was in a dilemma. I want to know which of the religions is going to give me the path to, not to heaven, to a moral, I believe in God, he said. I want to know how I have to act in business, in my everyday routine. Okay, that's what he was looking for. So hopefully this is where most of our listeners are at. I know that we're dealing with Hasidut, we're dealing with some Kabbalistic ideas, but we're grounded in the Masilat Yesharim, in the trait of Hasidut, and hopefully we'll understand what it means to be Chasidei Umos Ha'olam, to truly understand that it's more important what comes out of your mouth than what you put into your mouth. Okay, so I know that some guy said that 2,000 years ago, but it comes from us. It's okay. So this is especially relevant to our righteous and holy Gentile brethren that are looking to grow, and it's about goido b'toira, amilas b'toira. At least toil and grow in that Torah that was given to you. Okay, that's for starters, and then the whole world's yours. Okay, so with that, all right. I pass everything back to you.
Rabbi, yeah, as far as the Kuzari, I did a series 2 years ago now with Rabbi Goldberg on that, Rabbi Chaim Goldberg. We did 8 parts, just going through the first book. And, I've already set something up. I'm hoping, and I showed it to him, and I hope he might just do it with a new class on the book Kuzari, especially on the first book of it's just such beautiful work. I appreciate you bringing it up. We do have a question here because since you started this class, somebody from California who's been following along, they bought the book Masilas Yesharim, and they just wanted to ask a question. Is there anything not relevant in the book to a non-Jew? I mean, because this is somebody who's trying to take their walk serious and learn and grow. Nobody wants to jump into something they're not supposed to, but I know it's a wonderful class. I sat into it with Rabbi Michael Skobach. I've heard some of his lessons on it. Beautiful, beautiful things that come out. But is there anything that is not relevant to a non-Jew in there that they should stay away or avoid?
I think if there's anything that's not relevant to a non-Jew, it would become obvious, but I could be wrong. Anytime it says, because it's written for Jews, it's written for all mankind. You know, the Vilna Gaon, when he never met the Ramchal, but he was so interested, he said he would have given up everything just to meet the man, just face to face. We're talking about the Vilna Gaon, who's the greatest. He really held the Vilna Gaon, that this is the answer for mankind, right? When you talk about character trait, focus in on character traits. Focus in on what the Torah has to say about mankind. If you're looking at it from that angle, then just know that this is for you in potential, right? Are you obligated? Those things which you can do to improve your character, I would simply say, of course you're obligated, right? If it's something to do with some highfalutin idea that relates just to Jews, it'll become obvious, okay? But if it's anything that, it's going to talk to you, your soul was part of God, right? And you're going to intuit what is for me in changing my character. And I think you'll be amazed that maybe 99% of the book will be applicable to you as a non-Jew.
Applicable. I think that's clear. I hope that helps answer that question. I've thrown a little note out there. If anybody's got any questions, now's the time to put them in the chat box on YouTube or Facebook. We're going to try and wind it down. I know that it's late in Israel. It's got to be near 1 a.m. there, but we do appreciate you preparing this. We do appreciate you sharing with us. Let's see, what's this now? Yeah, somebody's really appreciating the Ramchal's material. I think today was such a beautiful lesson that it's reviewable for me even. Yeah, you had me smiling today, Rabbi. There was life there. There was, even talking about death that you mentioned. I mean, it just says live. This message today, I think, just says live. And, so many people have hopes and dreams and aspirations in the world to come that some of them just think of, like when we think of phony religions, they have a hereafter or they have a vision of heaven that is so heavenly minded, it's of no earthly good. And they start to check out and they start to get into things and imaginations, and that's really more bent on drives and desires. And what you've talked about today has to do with character, who you really are. And I think the beauty of the book you're discussing shows us how we can be of earthly good and of usefulness here and actually be happy and God honoring. But like you said, how can we when we're dealing with Hashem, how can we actually be of any use? I mean, to truly be humble. But I also love how you brought around this question today about Manis Freeman, Rabbi Freeman, because everything I've ever listened to from him just seems to drip wisdom. And I'm familiar with the debate or the points that came out, and I found it sad.
Anybody
can make a mistake.
Anybody can make a mistake, but you approach the person, you say you're making a mistake, right? And he was told that under certain terms, all his classes have no sources, and all of a sudden he was very responsive and he made a class on all his sources, right? And I watched that video, and they're all valid sources, right? Maybe it's an interpretation, maybe it's a slight nuance, but it's I agree, it's a very difficult topic to discuss. We will continue to discuss how, because that's what Hasidut is. It's this attitude, how am I going to please my Father in heaven? It's the most ridiculous thing. He doesn't need anything from us. But it's our attitude down here that is not going to affect him one bit. It's just the way we have to look at it and know that ultimately it has nothing to do with him. It has to do with us. It's the way, as I mentioned before, there's this concept called mitzido, mitzidenu, that there's an aspect coming from him, and that's called absolute, we call it truth, and that's mitzido, from his aspect. But we live in this world, and we have mitzidenu, from our perspective, and from, so it's a type walk. It's whatever. It's like walking on a tightrope. It's not an easy topic to discuss, and I give him a lot of credit for making every attempt, and I think that if anybody believes that he's making a mistake, instead of calling him evil, call him on his mistake, period. Ask him where his source is.
An error is an error.
And you have a problem with the source or the way he's interpreting the source, and is he the only one? You have the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You have other great Hasidic Rebbes who maybe interpret the same way. So your problem's not with Manis Friedman. Your problem is with Hasidut. And what can I tell you? I think that
wow, Rabbi,
we need unity more than ever before. We're all on the same team. We're working for the same boss. So where does this infighting? It's not helpful. What's helpful is proper rebuke out of love and being effective, right? There's no effectiveness here. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe they did. They said something and he brought out all the sources. Now, what's the next step, right? They should apologize and say, okay, we see your sources. We don't agree with them, but at least you have valid sources. Something like that. Or now we accept your sources, whatever it is. I have no idea. But anyway, you've heard from me.
Rabbi, your word coming out of Jerusalem, to us, to me is solid enough to say that, hey, there's a lot more behind the scenes. And as B'nai Noach, life is confusing enough, especially with the COVID. They've got the riots going on in the U.S. all over the place. We don't need to be confused with the differences and slight opinions and differences between rabbis against rabbis. But heaven forbid we ever say that a rabbi is a heretic. I think that it's stepping out of bounds. Unless I can back it up. Now, Rabbi, I spent 25 years working with magnetic anomalies. Okay, most people have no clue what they are or what they're useful for or what wouldn't. But when it comes to my research on it, I'll stand toe-to-toe against any university professor on the planet when it comes to proving that the global flood happened just the way Torah said it did. I have no difficulty validating it and showing them right where their entire plate tectonic model is incorrect. I will do that, and I will back it up 100%. And I have no difficulty saying that. But when it comes to saying a rabbi's a heretic, I could never, heaven forbid, I ever say a legitimate rabbi with shmika, with that's in the chain all the way back to Moses Rabbeinu is ever a heretic. Heaven forbid that should ever happen. That's not my place to say that. And if rabbis have differences of opinion, as you're saying, on nuances of what is the majority and what is not, I am not gonna condemn a rabbi on that. So I just feel you've done a lot of clarification and support for Rabbi Friedman here today, and I've never heard the man ever say anything that was not wise. That's my opinion. So I want to thank you for sharing that from Jerusalem.
Okay, I just want to add one more thing, because the shir I gave Thursday night, I gave the class Thursday night. I believe it's for the love of God, I joined the Jewish people. Yisro is mentioned in the Parsha, but not by name, by the name of Chovav. Because he loved the Torah, he overlooked, at least as Moshe was concerned, that he was going to see all the infighting amongst the Jews and then be scared away. But it was his love for Torah, and he trusted the Masorah, right? But he saw that the Jews were rebelling against God. We're talking about in the desert. They had machlokas amongst themselves, but they rebelled against God, and Moses was afraid because he saw that. Remember, he was a priest of other religions. He's probably seen it all, and now he sees the truth, and he's a little bit overwhelmed by the infighting or the rebelling against God, and Moses is basically convincing him to stick around, because we need you. Ready for this? That we need the convert. I'm not trying to convince anybody to convert. I'm talking about what Moses says to Jethro, that we need you to set the bar. We need you to help unify us. We need you from the Zaka, the Rabbi, to increase our merits. And therefore, whatever we offered you in the beginning and you said no, we're going to offer you a second time, the blessing that God gives us. He's giving us blessing because of you setting the bar higher. We get a blessing, and we're willing to share that blessing with you. This is what Moses says when Jethro, Hovav, says, no, I'm not going. I'm going on my way. I suggest people listen to the recording. You go to the Yiboneh YouTube channel, Yiboneh, and look for, or maybe you have to type it in. What did I say it's called? I forget what it's called. Something about for the safe. Oh gosh, I love for the love of God. For the love of God, I joined the Jewish people. Okay, and enjoy it.
Awesome, Rabbi. I want to thank you. You know what you're sharing. You know, I've heard so often that before Hashem brought the Torah to the nation of Israel, that He had offered it to the 70 nations and nobody wanted it. As the days get closer, may our hearts be changed on that matter, and may those of the 70 nations be open to hear the light of Torah. And we thank you. We thank you for sharing it with us. So, folks, we got a lot more coming next week. You heard Rabbi say he's got big chunks he's going to put aside till next week for Lesson 8. So we hope you can join us. So hopefully same time next week, Hashem willing, we'll be sharing part 8. So till then, have a lovely, lovely week.
It's